All right, so we are in our second part of this two-part podcast entitled "Is God Immoral?" And in the first part, I my intention was to more so to make an outline for myself of different considerations, different points of specific points of consideration that appear to be overlooked in the discussion of the morality of God in a lot of ways, and to try to organize for myself a way of kind of really formulating this idea in the way that I've understood it in the past and the way that my understanding is kind of developing a bit. So, in the please excuse the real raw and rough nature of this. It is a podcast, but its primary purpose, the reason why I'm doing it is really to organize my thoughts in this regard, and the reason why I'm not doing it as a private note is just because it's all relevant. It's all relevant. Even my thinking it through to compose something that'll be a little more comprehensive, I hope. But my thoughts as I'm thinking about this are still relevant, and I would like to have them lined out. So, the second part of this podcast, I'm just going to continue on with really just one other, as far as I can tell so far, one other point of consideration. And this point, I think all the three that I mentioned before, the anthropomorphization as one consideration, the sanctity of life, and the aspect of the creator versus the creature. That's one separate, another distinction. And then our considerations of morality uh, is a third one that I used in the last one. I guess it can be tied into this fourth one where I just titled it our conceptions of goodness and happiness as we talk about the goodness of God, and as we consider what that goodness is supposed to mean, how it's supposed to be realized in our existence, in our experience, and stuff like that. So, um, I still am saving that. I have that subnote where I touched on the distinction between trauma and suffering that leads to death, and then trauma and suffering that don't lead to life leaving the body, but result in continued life of hardship, and where those actually fall in that scale of just morality on the part of whatever superintendent would allow such to take place in its reality. So okay, so yeah, this fourth point, goodness and happiness, considerations about them, the way that is our current comprehension of goodness and happiness as it is, as we kind of try to map it onto what we see in my example of before of the Old Testament, and some of the accounts that a lot of people have a hard time squaring with their belief in a good God, um, and a benevolent God, an all good God. Okay, so I when I was thinking about this, I hadn't even I did Google Google's just ideas of goodness versus ideas of God's badness. I googled something along those lines, just to kind of get a couple of points to launch out on and stuff. And what came to mind was actually what came up was, first, it was a Reddit post um, that talked about that. Let me get back to it real fast. Let's see here in my screenshots. The question was: is God defined by goodness, or is goodness defined by God? So, and here's the fuller portion of it. this is from a comment I just I just posted that got me thinking. Does God define what goodness and truth and justice and mercy is, or is God defined by those concepts? For example, if God said that murdering newborns was good, would it be good to do so? Or would God never say that doing so is good, and thus God is confined by the greater abstract concept of something else? Question mark. I don't know why, but this makes me feel uncomfortable. So, anyways, that's just one Reddit post. There's a whole line of conversation after that, but that it just stood out to me that, like I was saying before, that area of morality is a hot point. It's a hot topic of God's morality specifically. It's a hot topic nowadays as people are as kind of atheism is as people are as more people are deconstructing into what they what they would call as atheist agnostic, or and their reasons for doing so being attributed to claims of immorality on the part of the God of the scriptures. So definitely a hot topic and stuff. So there's that question. We'll come back to it again. And then something else that came to mind though too was I mentioned this. I think I put this in a Facebook post not long ago, but it's a quote by C.S. Lewis. He has a lot of good quotes. There's a lot of other good ones that other people have made, but yeah, he has some good ones as well. But it's in this book. I think it's Mere Christianity, or maybe it's in Paralandra, or in the Hideous Strength, or one of those where I'm paraphrasing, but it says roughly, the idea that God is good is something that I can live with, but suppose you strive through to the good. Okay, yeah. Suppose you strive through to the good, only to find that that too is dreadful. So basically, it was just talking about how the concept of man's understanding of God's goodness is something that is sometimes held as a law, but there is a real reality where um, the accuracy of our comprehension of that goodness, of what goodness is in general, or what goodness means as being goodness in God. Um, if if that is inaccurate, then like I was saying before, it just brings up more things to consider um, before making this leap or making this charge against the revealed God of in the scriptures as being immoral. So um, those were the only for right now the only source points that I had. But I really just wanted to for right now just kind of think about just see what comes to mind as I think about um, that deal. So goodness. I am aware of I'm aware of my own expectation of what I think of as goodness. Um, and I guess it has gone through some change over the years. Of course, when as a child and we hear about God's goodness, we hear verses like um, just about God's plans to prosper and not to harm, um, and that He is for our good, and that all things work together for our good, and that the desire for of God for us is good, and all these things. It as a child, as a young person, it definitely has the mind of, well, those things that could harm me, or those things that um, yeah, those things that could hurt me, God will protect. God protects from. that's the child understanding of it. And then later on in life, perhaps around the time that I was an adult, not really in church, but when I would think about goodness, God's goodness. If I don't even remember if I actually really did that often, but it would it turned my understanding of it turned into something more like, well, because I had seen enough. I'd seen enough in my kind of an observation to know that, well, you know there's still a lot of suffering that happens in the world, and even suffering and bad stuff that happened to Christians that I knew growing up or things like that. And so I maybe I started to concede to the idea that God's goodness meant something like good for your good for your good good for a person regarding heaven. It's good for your soul, or it's good for your spirit. Whenever I would hear things about God's goodness and such. And then as in my own studies, as I myself was looking into the scriptures and desiring to understand, to yeah, have knowledge and understanding of God and His way. That's when the picture really did get solidified of this idea that God's zeal, God's interest in His good that He talks about is mainly for our spirit, for our inner person, our inner man, and secondarily for our outward body as we live in the earth. And I that's my most recent and as an adult most long held idea of it, and I still would define it that way. So I in my church that I have been a member of, and just in different contexts, most people you might be aware of that. Well, that saying where people say, well, God is good, and then someone responds all the time, and then all the time, and then and someone else responds, God is good. It's kind of like that response, kind of response saying that has become more fashionable in Christian circles nowadays. And yeah, there's been actually a few situations I remember where someone had passed me either at church or something, and they had began to do that, to say the first part, and I was supposed to have responded to it in such a way, and at first I was slow on the uptake, but then after I understood what was going on, whenever that would happen, I don't know, I had a awkward response to it. It for some reason I didn't really participate in that very much, and I had thoughts about it, about like, what, Ray, do you not think that God is good, and it wasn't that, it was just that I was insecure and about about what about what we're saying whenever we say that thing, or when other people, whenever we say that saying, or whenever I would hear people say it, whenever I would greet them, and I would say, hey, how you doing? And they'd be like, oh, brother, God is good, and stuff. And that one's a little more understandable. But but more or less just having just kind of an unsteadiness and awkwardness about the thing. And like I said, not because of myself doubting that God was good, but just I know that nugget, which is supposed to be a nugget of powerful edification and encouragement, kind of has been hijacked a little bit, and its meaning has been construed. And a lot of people, the expectation of many, um, as a result of that saying, I believe, well, it just it shows what it shows about it. So, um, so when an atheist, for example, or the person deconstructing, concludes that because of the things that are seen in the Old Testament, that God is responsible for commanding, and that yeah, they're horrible and hard things. Um, this, I believe, this view of what goodness and happiness means, it creates a dichotomy, a false dichotomy, but it creates a kind of a consternation, I would say, in the minds of in the minds of some, and they have a hard time squaring how it can be the case. How can you say that a God like that is good? A God that allows the things that that He allows, grape, the killing of children, innocent people, the condoning of slavery, the condoning of beating your wife, all these different things. They'll ask, how can you say that a God that condones those things is good? And yeah, these considerations are ones that um, yeah, that keep me from jumping out of the boat, basically, and also saying that that God is also immoral. I think it's too uh, yeah, I just don't think it's clear enough to say that. There's some things that I guess I would have to be gelled down for me to be able to say, okay, yeah, well then that actually is immoral. And one of those being, like I've been trying to articulate here, is this, how we're viewing God. Yeah, if God is more closely like, if God is closer to us, closer to man, and as far as, like I said before, his um, mind, will, and emotions uh, set, and God's, in the way that we see things as humans, as a creature, is if it's at all or anything like the way that God sees things, because that's one of the charges of the Christian life, is this moving into this way of seeing things the way that God sees them, agreeing with God is what they would say. And so and, and so yeah, there is an understanding of that our ways of seeing things are not intrinsically aligned, and that it is a matter of divine aid and new life that brings about one actually seeing things in the way that God sees them and stuff. So so we have that understanding is alive in Christian circles, um, and stuff. Um, so yeah, uh, continuing on with that, if we can concede that yeah, that God's difference from us is more than what has been made out, at least just more than what has been made out, then it does bring all of these issues of morality and God's culpability and the suffering that happens in life. It really does bring those questions back on the table. Just to kind of finish this point on goodness, um, I also see that on the level of human interaction and in human life, we do acknowledge an idea of goodness where where the good thing to do is not something that would promise immediate happiness. You know, yeah, we understand that concept very much. Concepts of sacrifice, you know, um, yeah, self-sacrifice, for the sake of the greater good, or for others or whatnot. That is a goodness, and we can even acknowledge goodness where where life is taken, where so it's dishonest to say that humans' only conception of goodness is one that is closely tied to happiness. Um, yes, goodness goodness is desired. The happiness and goodness to be together. I think that's part of the kind of the hedonistic impulse in human beings is the avoidance of suffering and the experience of good or pleasure. So we're very aware of the idea of badness being understood from things that are not pleasurable and things like that. So so then when we think of happiness, and our expectation, which is not a wrong expectation, because the scriptures do speak about happiness in relation to knowing God or life with God, or being in the being in the way of God. It does talk about happiness, um, and so right, if our comprehension of what the scriptures mean by the word happiness, if our current modern understanding of happiness maps correctly onto it, then yeah, like we kind of hold this view of yeah, bad stuff, no suffering, um, yeah, but yeah, bad stuff is doesn't happen. We're protected from it, and we get to live in peace and prosperity to whatever degree that's understood, but at least peace and something like happiness, or and some of the more stricter kinds would even say something like comfort even, but that even varies depending on the kind of doctrinal discipline kind of set of whatever kind of Christian group you're looking at. There are some who are more ascetic and are more abstinent, and they adhere to a more sober and serious and kind of a more solemn life. And then there are others who wholeheartedly embrace the happiness and the goodness of God blessing His children with the good things of this earth, and with with those things. So um, so happiness, and meaning this avoidance of unhappiness. Um, I'm going to endeavor to find out how to more fully make this concept, or just to kind of build on this distinctive, but yeah, I guess I would say that's the fourth, kind of the fourth portion, the fourth thing of consideration in this, just to the question of the morality and the morality of God. Um, thank you for all who have stayed and listened. I'm not done with this project. This is, like I said, just the beginning. I literally just have a notepad here that I've kind of been jotting down these, um, jotting down some of these thoughts as I've been thinking about them. It was actually a live stream that I listened to just this very morning that touched on that topic, and yeah, wanting to be more purposeful in producing content on this channel. I'm just going to go ahead and just allow, yeah, do this and do other things to just allow for the filling up of thoughts and considerations that hopefully, if, someone else can stumble across, and maybe they've been thinking about these things as well, and they can add something meaningful to it, or if my if my thought processes are at all helpful, they can be edifying to someone. So that's my hope going forward. Um, and yeah, there. I guess there might be a part three. I don't know. I probably should wrap it up. Should wrap this one up and just use this to make a more proper podcast. But and I might actually end up doing that. So for now, we'll leave off from this. Please comment if you have anything to share. It would help the channel grow, and help this help basically the visibility, so that the right people can see this, and well, we can be blessed. So thank you, until next time. Bye.